Hi, welcome to the interview. I'm joined by Olivier Blond, president of the French environmental group Respire, or Breathe, that calls for action on air pollution. In the last few weeks, dozens of cities around the world have registered peak pollution levels and, more precisely, high levels of particle matter, fine particles that go into our lungs when we breathe. Those cities include more than 20 in China, Delhi, Calcutta in India, but also Madrid, and here in Paris. Olivier Blond, thank you so much for joining us on France 24. Let's start by talking about why air pollution is so dangerous. The World Health Organization says about 3.7 million people die prematurely around the world due to poor air quality. By 2060, that number could rise to 6 or even 9 million deaths. What are the health risks associated with breathing dirty air?
The first consequences are in the nose and in the throat and in the lungs. And of course, it's respiratory. If you have an asthmatic child, you'll have to go every night to the hospital because he cannot breathe. So that's huge. But it's only a small part of the problem, because once the pollution reaches your lungs, it goes into the blood, and it can irritate your arteries and your veins. And then it can produce stroke, cerebrovascular events, and then death. And that's the most important consequences. It's the cardiovascular events.
Now, Paris doesn't have a reputation for its fog like London or its smog like Beijing, yet around 48,000 deaths a year are attributed to the poor air quality. How bad is pollution in Paris?
Well, the pollution is disturbing every day of our life. And even when you don't see it, even when it's invisible, when you don't smell it, it goes into your lung because you cannot stop breathing. And that's the point. And that's the reason why there is such toll for air pollution. That is, it's every day.
Now, tell us about your court case. Respire, your NGO, has filed a class action lawsuit against the government. Why and what for?
Our starting point is that air pollution is nothing new in France and nothing new in Paris. Peak of pollution occurs every year. No government has done anything for 20 years.
But those peaks are linked to the weather.
When there is a peak, it's because there is meteorological conditions that keep this pollution on the city.
But let's talk about now one of the actions that Paris is taking as a city to combat pollution is these pollution stickers, vignettes, as we're calling them in French. They are labels that will be mandatory for drivers in Paris starting later this month. What are they intended to do? What are these stickers intended to do? And do you think that they will make a difference?
The stickers act like a low emission zone, like in London. The idea is to say, if your car is too much of a pollutant one, it should not get in the city. So there are numbers, which are levels of pollution, and if there is a peak, and if your car is emitting too much, then you will not be allowed to get in the city during working hours. You can do such in weekends and in the evening. I think it's a very good idea, but I think also that it's not enough. For many reasons. The first one is that cars are not the only polluting objects in France. Industry is polluting a lot. And during the last peak, there was a fuel plant very close to Paris, which was just working a lot because it was cold and because we had some trouble with our nuclear reactors. So it emits a lot. Heating devices are emitting a lot too, and agriculture practices, not in the winter, but in spring or summer, are also responsible. So we should not focus only on cars. The second very important point is that if we say to people, do not use your car to go to work, we should provide another way of transportation. And this car issue is related to a very, very big issue in Paris and around. That is the dire situation of public transportation.
But, you're talking about other forms of pollution. So alternate driving, which is something that we're seeing more and more in Paris, but also in other cities around the world, where if you have there's different methods, but if you have a license plate ending with an even number, you drive on even days. Is that a solution?
Well, it is not a solution because its effect is negligible. It's only a few percent of the global emission. So it's not that much. And it's unfair. Because if you have a small car, which is quite clean, but the wrong plate number, you can't drive, but your neighbor, he has a huge SUV with diesel motors, and he can just do whatever he wants. It's unfair.
It also doesn't address the root of the problem, right? I mean, if so much of the pollution comes from other sources, not just cars and trucks and vehicles, it comes from industry, pesticides, etc. What are the measures to control their pollution?
Well, it's a true question, and we are waiting for the state to do actions on those other issues.
Now I'd like to talk about whether this is a local effort or a global one, because for now we're seeing cities, more than half the world's population lives in cities now, which probably explains why cities are on the forefront in the fight against air pollution. But it does seem that they're all acting independently of each other. Is there a space for a more coordinated effort, or is combating air pollution, is it a local fight no matter where it is?
I think that the cities are leading the fight against air pollution. And this is striking in France, but also in other countries. And in my opinion, there are at least two different reasons for this situation. The first one, and it's related to our legal complaint, is that the state has failed. It has failed to protect us. So if the state doesn't do anything, other bodies should take the lead, and it's the cities. And the second other reasons is that the state is a little bit just too far away from the people, from the citizens, and they lose connection. They forget what is the true problems of the people.
So that's why maybe cities are on the forefront and maybe not the central governments. But what about cities amongst themselves or coordination of some kind?
Well, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, has just been elected the head of the C40. And C40 is an international group of big cities like New York, Mexico, London, and so on. And those big cities, they share good practices, advices, knowledge, and they help one the other. And I think it's a very interesting way of doing international relations, maybe more efficient than some international treaties which are not that efficient.
But at the same time, since it is a local problem, right? I mean, it's also a weather problem, as you said before. How can, if one city manages to reduce its pollution, how can others do the same? It's a question of lessons and policies.
Yes. If the air is cleaner in London, it won't help Paris or Mexico, sadly.
Now, when we're talking about pollution, we're talking a lot about Asia these days. It's because Asia is so industrialized. But Europe used to be industrialized like Asia. What are the differences with back then and today? And could we see maybe one day Asia returning to levels that we have currently in Western Europe?
There are clearly differences between pollution in Europe and Asia. Energy in Europe, it's mostly... Well, it's not that much of coal. And in Asia, it can be up to 80% of the energy. And coal is producing a lot of air emission.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today at the interview. Olivier Blond is president of the French group Respire, or Breathe, tackling air pollution here in Paris, but also issues that concern the world. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition. Do stay tuned. There's more news coming up on France 24.
Thank you.